Okay, so how many damage dice do the monsters around here tend to roll? Ugh. Alright, I'll take 2 backup shields and an entire extra case of potions, please. Today, I'm going to offer some tips to help new players make the most out of combat in Pathfinder 2nd Edition on today's episode of The Local Disaster Tour Guide. Hello travelers and tourists, my name is Mark and I am the local disaster tour guide. That's right, I am a storyteller who's asking you to please stop bullying that poor Agolthu. What did it ever do to you? Welcome to a journey through the fantastic world of TTRPGs like Pathfinder and Starfinder. And welcome to 5 more tips for new players in Pathfinder 2e, where I offer some quick advice for new players in Pathfinder 2nd Edition to help them get the most out of this game. Now, this is part 2 of the series, and I'll throw a link up here to part 1 of the series in case you missed that. In part 1 of this series, I talked a little bit about character creation, and also gave some tips to help players kind of decode Pathfinder 2e. But today, I wanted to talk about something a little more specific, and talk about combat itself. Combat is a big part of any tabletop RPG, and some of the extremes of combat in Pathfinder 2e can garner a pretty significant reaction, so I feel like this is a portion of the game that's worth pausing to consider. So today, I'm going to give new players 5 tips to help them be more successful with combat in Pathfinder 2e, and I'll go ahead and tell you this, I am not very good at burying the lead. Tip number 1 is easily the most important part of this video. Man, that is really going to mess with my watch time. In any case, before we dive into all of that, don't forget to do all of the YouTube stuff. If you enjoy this video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can check out my free Discord and my Patreon. Both of those will be linked in the video description. And as always, the best thing you can do is jump down into the comments section and be a part of the conversation. I love to hear what you all have to say, and I would love to know what advice you would give new players when it comes to combat in Pathfinder 2e as well. Alright, let's get started. Alright, tip number 1 for understanding combat in Pathfinder 2e is this. Pathfinder 2e prioritizes offense over defense at almost every level of the game. Seriously, there are a ton of examples I can give here, but if you really dig into the rules for Pathfinder 2e, you're going to find time and time and time again that Paizo structures Pathfinder 2e in a way that it's easier to push the offensive capabilities rather than the defensive capabilities of your character. A simple example would be, in most cases, weapon proficiencies scale faster than armor proficiencies. For another example, if you jump over to spellcasting, most spells in Pathfinder 2e still have some kind of effect even if the creature makes its saving throw against that spell. Most of the time, creatures only avoid the entire effect of a spell if they make a critical success instead of a regular success. And don't even get me started on the number of spells and actions in this game that have some kind of tag-on effect that makes your offense just a little bit more impactful overall in this game. Oh, this spell adds the clumsy condition. Oh, this strike allows you to inflict the frightened condition. This game is full of ways to increase your offensive potential and even add a lot of tag-on effects to your offense in just a variety of different ways. Here's a big one that should clue you in on this point. Weapons and armor can both get magical upgrades in this game in the form of runes that make them more effective. Weapon potency runes come online around level 2, and the striking rune comes online around level 4. On top of that, there are some weapon property runes that come online around level 3. The most basic fundamental rune for armor, the armor potency rune, comes online at level 5, and the second fundamental rune, the Resilient rune, comes online around level 8. That means there is a very real possibility in Pathfinder 2e that your weapon will have both of its fundamental runes and its first property rune before your armor ever gets its first magical upgrade. When you examine this system in a variety of different ways, one of the things you will notice is Pathfinder 2e, time and time again, prefers offense to defense, and when you understand this mentality in the game design, a lot of the decisions that you make in combat should change to reflect that reality. Now, I do want to step back here and say that from a game design perspective, I actually appreciate the fact that Paizo did this. Many other RPGs will often prioritize defense over offense. In fact, the scaling for magic items in Pathfinder 1st Edition is almost the reverse of what I just talked about for 2e. In a lot of systems, it's very easy to prioritize your defense, and it takes a while for your offense to get online. And if you've ever played a level 1 combat in D&D 5e, Pathfinder 1st Edition, or other similar TTRPGs, you may have had the same experience that I've had, where you and the monster that you're fighting roll and roll and roll and roll and nobody can hit each other, and the combat kind of drags a bit because a strong defense is so easy to achieve. Paizo recognized in developing Pathfinder 2e that rolling lots of damage dice is just fun, and it's one of the easiest ways to get an emotional rush out of a fight scene, so they flipped the numbers in their game, and this is a game that prioritizes offense over defense. Figure this point out, and a lot of other things you need to know about combat in Pathfinder 2e are going to snap into place. However, I feel I should follow up that point with tip number 2. That doesn't mean you should just attack 3 times every turn. Now, some of you, in hearing that statement that offense is more important than defense in Pathfinder 2e, probably immediately jump to the fact that starting from level 1, any character in the game can use all 3 actions on their turn to attack, attack, attack. That is a completely legitimate use of your turn, but if you have spent any time around Pathfinder 2e forums or other conversations on the internet, you have probably heard that making 3 attacks in 1 round is a good way to waste an action every single turn. And that's because of the multiple attack penalty. Your first attack is made at your normal bonus, your second attack is at a -5 bonus, and your final attack is at a -10 bonus. Now, those numbers can be modified by certain things, but just looking at the base numbers, Pathfinder 2e is a system where critical hits and critical misses are based on rolling 10 above or 10 below a particular number, meaning that your third attack, no matter what number you roll on the dice, is going to be 1 degree of success worse than whatever you would have rolled initially. Now, there are certain exceptions in Pathfinder 2e. A classic example would be a Flurry Ranger wielding an agile weapon, but as a general rule, that third attack in Pathfinder 2e, while it is something you can try, it's probably not a very effective use of your time in combat. Instead, when you're deciding what you want to do during combat in Pathfinder 2e, you want to think creatively and figure out other ways to use your actions that can give you or members of your team an advantage during the fight. Pathfinder 2e is a system that is designed to encourage creative thinking, mobility on the battlefield, and just a more interactive experience than walking up to a monster and just swinging away until one of you is dead. I don't know the exact numbers on this, and if somebody does, please feel free to share it in the comments, but I've heard different numbers around the internet stating that attacks of opportunity in Pathfinder 2e are only available on about 1/4 to 1/3 of the monsters that you might encounter. Attacks of opportunity and similar abilities do exist in Pathfinder 2e, but they are much rarer, which means it's a lot easier for your characters to move around the battlefield. This means you have a lot more opportunity to position your characters better, to set up actions on future turns, and to look for ways to aid your teammates in whatever they might be about to do on their turn. Pathfinder 2e is a game that focuses very heavily on offense, but that word offense doesn't mean just repeatedly swinging your sword until something is dead. Pathfinder 2e is a system that intends for combat to be a little more creative and a little more involved. And that brings us to tip number 3, which is, bullying is remarkably effective. Wait, what? Oh gosh, I'm going to get demonetized for this. Okay, so I kind of teased this point a little bit earlier, and if you've seen some of the conversations around Pathfinder 2e, you may have encountered this already. There are several different things in Pathfinder 2e that you can do to inflict status conditions, to debuff, to put your enemy at some sort of disadvantage, which will ultimately help other members of your team be more effective. Last year, I ran a sample game for a few other Pathfinder 2e content creators here on YouTube, and I let them battle against the Salt Stalker monsters that were my winning entries for RPG Superstar in 2020. And I remember in the last fight of that particular adventure that each of the content creators just started taking turns debuffing a particular Salt Stalker over and over and over again until that poor creature was just at so bad of a mechanical disadvantage that they were knocking it all over the place. Debuffs matter in this system. Something as simple as the Frighten condition can allow your party to hit more and crit more, and lower the amount of incoming damage that your party is going to take. In a lot of TTRPGs, you'll hear the concept of focus fire as sort of an idea for players to remember. It's a good idea for you and your team to pick a particular target and try to lock down and take out that particular target before moving on to other threats. And that's kind of the idea that I'm talking about here, though in Pathfinder 2e it is a little more complex, just because there are so many conditions and so many options that you can use to hinder whatever your enemy might be doing. And again, speaking of spells, a lot of spells in this game have more power tucked inside of them than you might initially realize because of their ability to debuff an enemy in one way or another. So instead of just swinging your sword and hoping that you roll well enough to make up for that -10 on your last strike, instead what you can do is look at your positioning, look at your skills, look at your spells, and find ways to give yourself or your teammates advantages against a particular foe, and you will probably find that fights go a lot easier for you. Also, bullying is bad. I hope I don't have to say that on the internet, but don't bully people in real life. Seriously, just don't do it. Alright, so that brings us to tip number 4, and this is sort of the flip side of the coin of our previous tip, which is operate as a team. Characters that operate alone in Pathfinder 2e are the kinds of characters who are probably going to get overwhelmed very quick and very badly. As my friend Drew from Team Player Gaming likes to say, teamwork is vital in this game. And you want to make sure that your character is operating as part of the team that you are playing with. Really quick, I want to give you some insight to the Game Master's perspective on Pathfinder 2e. If a Game Master wants to build a moderate threat encounter for their party in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and they are using on-level monsters, one on-level monster is the equivalent of 2 player characters. That's how the numbers are stacked up. So if you have a level 4 party and you're fighting level 4 monsters, you would expect 2 party members for every single monster in that fight, again assuming we're looking at a moderate threat encounter. Now I want you to think about that for a second. If one on-level monster is intended for 2 player characters, what happens if your player character goes solo against that same monster? The answer is, it probably ends badly. I'm not saying you can't come out on top, but it's going to be a much tougher fight. And Pathfinder 2e is a game where the solo superhero lone wolf character just isn't gonna last very long. If you want to think about it in conjunction with the previous point, if bullying is remarkably effective, the best way to bully is with a team, and if you don't have a team, you're probably going to get bullied yourself. And this principle that teamwork is important is something that applies to every class and every character in the game. I don't care if you're playing the fighter, the cleric, the wizard, the rogue, the gunslinger, the thaumaturge. I don't care what crazy character concept you have come up with. This is a game built around the idea that you and your friends are playing together, you are working together to overcome challenges. And if your character tries to run off on their own, the likelihood of them getting overwhelmed is very high. In Pathfinder 2e, even monsters that would be considered trivial or easy threat monsters often have an attack bonus that is high enough that they're going to be hitting your character somewhere around 40 to 50% of the time, maybe even a little more. So even relatively weak monsters in this system can very easily overwhelm a solo character if you're not careful. So when you're building your character, ask how you can build your character with your team in mind, ask how you can support the other players, and what you and other players can do in tandem to make your party more effective, and that's going to carry you a long way in Pathfinder 2nd Edition. But now it's time to talk about the last tip in this video, and in order to do that, I really need to drive home tip number 1 just one more time. Pathfinder 2nd Edition is an edition that prioritizes offense over defense, and so far in this video I've mostly talked about that from the player's perspective. It's easier for the player to get bonuses to their attack and bonuses to their damage, and it's easier for the player to dish out damage and effects with their spells. But the thing is, that emphasis on offense applies to both sides of the screen. Players and monsters both prioritize offense over defense, meaning in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you're going to take a hit. Now, don't get me wrong, tanking is not impossible in Pathfinder 2e, but if you want to play a character who is a tank, or for other characters in general, tip number 5, in Pathfinder 2e, defense is about mitigating damage, not avoiding damage. In Pathfinder 2e, you want to ask the question, how can I make my character more effective at taking hits? How can I absorb the damage? How can I offset the damage? What can I do to negate some of that incoming damage that I'm going to take so that my character remains effective and a contributing member of the fight? Now, don't get me wrong, there are things you can do in Pathfinder 2e to make your character better at avoiding damage. For example, conditions like concealed and hidden are easy ways to potentially negate an entire incoming attack, so there are ways to avoid damage in Pathfinder 2e, but remember I said, even relatively weak monsters will often be hitting your character about 50% of the time. Even very defensive characters in the system are going to take hits, it's going to happen regularly, and when you are thinking about defense as a concept in Pathfinder 2nd Edition, you need to ask the question, how can I make the incoming damage not as serious of an issue? Over on No Nat One's channel, he loves to say that armor class in Pathfinder 2e is not about not getting hit, it's about not getting crit. And that's one thing to keep in mind is when you're looking at your character's armor class, you want to look at raising your armor class as a way to avoid those attacks that beat your AC by more than 10, thus reducing the number of truly severe incoming critical hits that your character has to deal with. So any option you have that increases your armor class is going to be useful on that front, and literally any character in the game can raise a shield to potentially up their AC a little bit, making them less likely to take those truly severe incoming hits. However, there are often other options that can further help you avoid taking damage even from regular hits. Many classes have, and almost any character can take, the shield block feat, which gives you a reaction that allows the shield that you are holding to absorb incoming damage, and there are spells such as the shield spell that also allow you to absorb incoming damage as well. Low-level shields might negate 3 damage per incoming hit, and high-level shields might negate 15 damage or more per incoming hit, and can potentially do this 2, 3, maybe 4 times a fight. You add those numbers up, and your character is going to be able to take a lot more hits than they would if they'd never bothered to raise the shield in the first place. I've argued many times on this channel that potions and other consumables are more important in this game, and I think that's true because there's a real probability, especially in moderate and above fights, that your character will need to pop a potion at some point to keep themselves up and engaged in combat. There are a number of class feats, there are a number of items, a number of spells There are a lot of different things in Pathfinder 2e that you can do to absorb damage or give yourself temporary HP or otherwise make your character more durable, thus meaning that when the damage comes in, you can take it and dish it right back out because, like I said earlier, you've got some pretty good offense as well. If you go into Pathfinder 2e expecting your character to never take a hit, that's probably not going to happen. But if you go into Pathfinder 2e ready to take a hit and with tricks up your sleeve to make it where those hits aren't as bad as they might look at first, then I think you'll get some good mileage out of combat in this game. But that's all I've got for you today. This has been 5 more quick tips for new players in Pathfinder 2e, looking at, in particular, how to get the most out of combat in this game. So, the time has come for me to turn the conversation over to you. What are your favorite tips for getting the most out of combat in Pathfinder 2e, and what recommendations would you give to new players who might be a little overwhelmed by some of the philosophical changes about how combat works in this game? Jump down to the comments section and let me know your thoughts. And if you have ideas for the next round of tips for new players, leave those down there as well. I'd love to hear what you have to say. Don't forget the other YouTube stuff, like, share, subscribe, check out my free Discord and my Patreon. But as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for being part of the conversation. Have a wonderful day.